And this is actually not the end of Understanding 9/11, a television news archive. As when you change the last 2 digits on the web address to 18, an extra day appears on news archives that are blank, except until you click on some.
Here are some other headlines. A Pakistani delegation has left Afghanistan, no agreement on turning over Osama bin Laden. Here in the U.S., 4 people are being believed held as material witnesses in the FBI investigation. 200 others are being sought now.
Dan, the United States has received intelligence reports indicating that Mohammed Atta, the pilot of the first plane to crash into the World Trade Center towers, met early this year somewhere in Europe with the head of the Iraqi intelligence service. Intelligence officials say they believe this report to be accurate. They say this is not a smoking gun, but it is the first indicator, obviously, that a foreign power may have aided, abetted, or had prior knowledge to Tuesday's attack. Mohammed Atta, by the way, is believed to have been the cell leader of the 19 individuals responsible for Tuesday's attack, but officials say they have no firm concrete evidence of that yet.
It seems that being exactly 8 days after 9/11, CBS's Jim Stewart is the first to report the eventual disputed Iraq link to Mohammed Atta, with the intelligence officials that Stewart details in his report as being believable and accurate actually turns out to be Israeli intelligence, the Mossad. Because even though this report on Atta is still days before any case of anthrax letters are mailed off and eventually received the following month in October 2001, essentially those early stages with the anthrax attack investigations are also used to harmonize and suggest that the alleged meeting in Prague between Atta and head of Iraqi intelligence was for the exchange of the anthrax, which subsequently is proven to have come from U.S. AMRID in Dietrich, Maryland. Although this report is eventually repeated with some detail, CBS won't be the only one picking up this story, but the report on the last count believed of 4 material witnesses arrested, as well as 49 detained, will also be a constant.
Now for the latest on the people suspected of carrying out these attacks. U.S. investigators are holding 49 people for questioning in connection with immigration violations. As many as 200 people are being sought. In New Jersey, the FBI is focusing on a neighborhood in Jersey City where Muslims convicted in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing lived.
The FBI has taken a San Antonio, Texas doctor to New York for questioning. Dallas Morning News reports there is an apparent link between the doctor and 2 men removed from an Amtrak train in Fort Worth, Texas, last week. Texas newspapers report that the 2 men were suspected hijackers.
While the investigation is ongoing and still moving forward vigorously, we are beginning to learn more about the attack last Tuesday and the plot to make it happen. As we have said before, we do believe that there are associates of the hijackers that have connections to terrorist organizations that may still be in the United States. The tips we have received and the leads developed in the FBI field offices have been extremely helpful in helping us assemble a list of individuals that might have information about these associates or, in fact, be among the associates. We are looking at the possibility that there may have been more than 4 planes targeted for hijacking, but we are not able at this time to confirm that.
Well, now it seems that John Ashcroft and the FBI are momentarily willing to admit that they believe there were more hijacking targets intended on September 11th, and with the material witness warrants being sealed, the media does not hesitate to report this revelation. But of course, the claim that there were additional targeted flights does not become part of the official story, which we will address further ahead.
Also, Attorney General John Ashcroft is confirming reports that more than 4 planes were targeted in the terror attacks. The investigation in this case continues to gain momentum, including more arrests.
Pat, U.S. officials say a total of 75 people are now in custody, mostly for immigration violations. Attorney General John Ashcroft says 190 people are still being sought for questioning. Law enforcement officials say a total of 4 people are under arrest as material witnesses in last week's terrorist attacks. Among them, 34-year-old Dr. Al-Badr Al-Zami, a Saudi national arrested at a Texas hospital Friday. A computer and boxes of paper were removed from his home by FBI agents. Attorney General John Ashcroft says all of those being held on immigration charges are being subject to brand new laws about how long they can be detained.
At this hour, 200 people are wanted for questioning in the terrorist attacks. That number doubled since yesterday. And we're beginning to learn more about the plot, I should say, surrounding Tuesday's hijackings. Fox 5's Paul Wagner's been tracking the investigation for us. He joins us live from our newsroom. Paul?
Well, Mike, earlier today, just about an hour ago, Attorney General John Ashcroft said they're looking now into the possibility that more planes were hijacked. I should say more planes were targeted for hijacking, but the FBI cannot confirm that at this point. In addition, the Attorney General said they would like to talk to as many people as they can who may have answers to their questions.
Our effort includes talking to the numbers of people that may have information related to the case. That's why we have forwarded a list of more than 190 people to national, state, and local law enforcement agencies across the country and other organizations that could be helpful in this effort, organizations like the airlines.
Attorney General John Ashcroft says more than 4 jetliners may have been targeted in last week's attack.
The nation's top law enforcement officer announced several more steps that authorities are taking to crack down on foreign nationals whose immigration status is in question. Gary Reels has more details now from our satellite center.
JC, Ashcroft says the fight against terrorism has become the overriding priority of the Justice Department since last week. He is establishing an anti-terrorism task force in every one of the 50 states, and he's also trying to find out just how many airplanes were intended to take part in last week's attack. Since the suicide hijackers crashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, there has been much speculation that the White House, the Capitol, Air Force One, and Camp David were alternative or additional targets. But now, the Attorney General says more than 4 jetliners may have been part of the plot for September 11th. If the plan did include other aircraft, that means, of course, there are other would-be hijackers still out there. Since the attack, 75 foreign nationals have been detained for questioning. More than 190 others are being sought as the search for associates continues.
Investigators sent the airlines and authorities a list of 200 people they want to question. They also confirmed they're looking into the possibility the terrorists intended to hijack more than 4 planes.
A week after the terrorist attacks that shook the nation and the world, President Bush led the White House staff in a moment of silence for the dead, the wounded, and grieving. As they paused, federal authorities sent the airlines and state and local authorities a list of 200 names, individuals they want to question. And they confirm they are investigating whether terrorists planned to hijack a 5th plane in Tuesday's attacks.
We have not ruled that out in our evaluation, and we are pursuing an examination and investigative potentials that might help us be more certain.
As the search for other terrorists proceeds, the Immigration and Naturalization Service was given special controversial authority. It will let them hold aliens indefinitely in special circumstances.
Investigators say there's a possibility more than 4 planes were targeted in the initial attack. And at a briefing today, U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft said nationwide task forces have been set up to look for associates of the hijackers that may still be in the country.
Task forces will be a part of a national network that will coordinate the dissemination of information and the development of a strategy to disrupt, dismantle, and punish terrorist organizations throughout the country.
75 people have been detained for questioning, 4 arrested as material witnesses in the terrorist investigation.
The number of missing continues to climb up in New York City, and so does the number of arrests. 4 people have been arrested in connection to these attacks. 75 people have been detained. We've also learned tonight that more than 4 attacks may have been planned last Tuesday. Well, tonight authorities have raised to 200 the number of names on a watch list of people that they want to question in connection with Tuesday's terrorist attacks.
We begin with the investigation. There is new information tonight about ties the terrorists had to our local area and possibly to leaders in Iraq. Jackie Benson is here now with more on that. Jackie?
Well, Jim, U.S. officials tell NBC News that Mohammed Atta, the hijacker who flew American Airlines Flight 11 into the World Trade Center, met with Iraqi intelligence officials in Europe earlier this year. U.S. officials characterized the meeting as another lead to pursue. but they say it is not sufficient evidence to formally link Iraq's leader Saddam Hussein to the attacks. And there is official confirmation this afternoon that investigators believe the terrorist plan was not limited to 4 planes. Attorney General John Ashcroft publicly confirmed for the first time that FBI agents are investigating a chilling scenario, that the plot for last Tuesday's attacks was even more extensive. In New York, 4 people are under arrest as material witnesses in last week's terrorist attacks. Officials now say a total of 75 people are in custody, mostly on immigration charges, and they are subject to a new INS regulation that went into effect last night.
A federal grand jury in New York has opened an investigation into the attacks on the World Trade Center. Also, Attorney General John Ashcroft says more than 4 aircraft may have been part of last week's plot. And for the first time, there are indications, still unconfirmed, that a foreign government may have been involved. Gary Reels in the Satellite Center with the latest. Gary, what do you know?
Well, Gordon, for the past week now, most fingers have been pointing, of course, to Osama bin Laden. But tonight, Iraq also is coming under U.S. government scrutiny. CBS News reports one of the 19 hijackers had a meeting with a top government official in Baghdad. Mohammed Atta was one of the hijackers on American Flight 11 out of Boston. It was the first jetliner to crash into the World Trade Center last Tuesday. Tonight, CBS News reports Atta met earlier this year in Europe with the chief of Saddam Hussein's intelligence apparatus. The subject of the meeting with the Iraqi is unknown, but it is the first time a foreign government official has been connected to any of the 19 hijackers. At his press briefing today, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld paused long when asked about the report.
What I have said, as clearly as I know how, is that states are supporting these people. And what constitutes evidence and who wants to present it at what time, I'll leave to the people in that business. I'm in a different business.
At the Justice Department, however, they're not talking about Saddam Hussein.
I wouldn't be in a position to discuss evidence in regard to questions about other responsible parties.
Ashcroft does say that the September 11th plot may not have been fully executed.
We learn something, often something small or incremental, every hour. Today, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Bob Graham of Florida, said that the attacks last Tuesday were part of a larger plan. And the Attorney General said today there was a possibility that terrorists planned to hijack more than 4 planes last Tuesday.
And interesting enough, in reference to who Peter Jennings mentioned, Bob Graham, because one of the main senators that backed the initiative to release the 28 pages missing from the Joint House Inquiry Investigation, also known as the JIS report, that Graham still maintains till this day in the belief that there were more hijacking attempts intended on 9/11.
Peter, people at the FBI say their massive investigation has developed substantial leads, including a suspect list of some 190 people, 37 of them flight trained. FBI agents are investigating whether there were other terrorists with other plans on that day a week ago.
We are looking at the possibility that there may have been more than 4 planes targeted for hijacking.
For example, the investigation has led the FBI to issue a warning to the pilots of crop dusters to be on the lookout for suspicious activity. And no such planes are allowed near the country's 30 largest cities. Out of apparent fear, a chemical attack of some kind could be launched. Law enforcement authorities in a number of states also have been told that a possible terrorist strike might be carried out using a fire truck or ambulance loaded with explosives.
And it's important to note here, with all the hysteria and state of alert going on at this moment after 9/11, still proceeds with many warning signs and threat assessments for potential targets that ranged outside the modus operandi of hijacking passenger airliners. And what was also detailed here by Brian Ross about fire trucks or ambulances loaded with explosives, potentially being car bombs, is extremely important, as also very telling indeed with the authorities handling the crisis, mainly their sloppiness and cover-ups, with what's later concerned about the graphic news coverage and explosive accounts regarding the destruction of the Twin Towers, even though the intention of this film is not to get into any of the physical anomalies about the World Trade Center. But on the official scale, being that 9/11 is basically the largest international terrorist attack anywhere, as said to have been carried out by Al-Qaeda under the behest of Osama bin Laden, yet all the previous terrorist attacks attributed to the loose organization, including what's argumentative regarding the first attack with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, plus the attacks that have happened since 9/11, have all been events that have used explosives or bombs. Yet, since Wednesday, September 12th, as some of the mainstream news networks already had on their architect and physics experts to relieve and bring closure to the public, and that the buildings came down from the subsequent fires, and that no explosives were in the Twin Towers, therefore no reason for the American public to panic or be alarmed for any other types of impending terrorist attacks, other than what was seen with the airplane hijackings. But here we are, 8 days later, and the authorities are warning the public that yes, there could be more terrorists out to use explosives. I mean, shouldn't there also be something said about the FBI titling the 9/11 investigation as Pent Bomb, Twin Bomb?
The FBI has now detained 75 people in the investigation of the attacks. Attorney General John Ashcroft said today that there's a possibility more than 4 planes were targeted for hijacking. CBS News correspondent Jim Stewart in Washington has new information this evening about the hijackers. Jim?
Dan, U.S. officials have received a report that at least one of the dead hijackers met before the attacks with an Iraqi intelligence officer. They believe the report to be accurate. Officials say Mohammed Atta, the pilot of the first plane to crash into the World Trade Towers, met early this year in Europe with the head of Saddam Hussein's European intelligence service. The meeting is not a smoking gun, officials say, but it is the first indication that a foreign state may have aided or at least had some knowledge of last Tuesday's attack.
But there's also something to be said with the rush to judgment in already trying to implicate Iraq this early in the investigation, with so much questioning regarding reprisal attacks and just the extent with the range of hijacking targets really intended on the day of 9/11, and as even with September 13th, which has really been the premise for this film, because such a wide-scale operation as what the news reports are alluding to would seem beyond the range of state sponsorship or organization through Iraq and Saddam.
Meanwhile, the number of potential suspects involved in the attacks now being held under sealed material witness warrants is believed to stand at 4, while the number of people placed on a national watch list grows almost hourly.
There it is. That's as far as we can go down the news timeline regarding the immediate dragnet with the 9/11 investigation, pertaining to additional thwarted or aborted hijacking attempts, as well as potential terrorist activities. We may have not been able to identify our suspect from JFK Airport from September 13th and suspected on Flight 23 on 9/11, but we've certainly collected enough details to know when and how the story got buried. And from what we've entirely covered so far, the question should be asked, is this enough reason to believe that the 9/11 attacks were just a continuation or expansion of the original Bojinka plot? The answer is yes.